Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. We have two guests this show. In the first hour, we're going to be speaking to Jeff Belanger about the world's most haunted places. And in the second hour, we're going to be speaking with Susan Reed about living an inspired life. Very interesting mix today. But don't forget, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out about all the services that I offer, which include medical intuition evaluations, psychic readings, and energy healing. Also is loaded with articles and products and the books I sell. It has everything. It is like your one-stop shop, sort of. Anyway, and it's also brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's AppliedEnergeticsInstitute.com. And don't forget, please do go by the Just Energy Radio webpage. That's www.justenergyradio.com and sign up for our newsletter. You can also have access to our over 5 years worth of archives with excellent programming like you're going to be hearing today. So let me tell you a little bit about Jeff and get him on the air. Now, I have to tell you, I met Jeff at a conference, I'm going to say last year. It was in 2011. He's a really fun guy. But let me, do the official bio, and we'll get him on because he's going to be telling us spooky stories. So turn the lights off, maybe get some hot chocolate because I think we're going to have a lot of fun being scared. Jeff Ballinger is one of the most visible and prolific paranormal researchers today. Since 1997, the former journalist has interviewed thousands of eyewitnesses to paranormal occurrences. He is the ultimate insider and knows how to connect with people from all walks of life when it comes to the unexplained. He's the author of a dozen books on the paranormal, including the bestsellers The World's Most Haunted Places, Our Haunted Lives, and Who's Haunting the White House. And we're going to have to find out more about that one. So his website is jeffballinger.com. Please welcome Jeff Ballinger. Hey, Jeff, how's it going?
It's going great. How are you, Dr. Rita?
I am doing wonderful, and thank you so much for, stepping away from the computer and your writing and spending some time with us here on Just Energy Radio. I have to tell you, doing shows about ghosts, I always have the most fun because I like to make jokes about, spooky things and ghosts and being scared. So I'm hoping that you got your sleeves rolled up so you can, spook us a little bit. But I'm going to start off easy with you. And when I bring a new guest on, because I do have people come on kind of regular, I always like to get their story. So what got you interested in the paranormal and the ghost phenomena in the first place?
I guess I was born into it. I grew up in an old New England town and had friends from a young age that were just very matter-of-fact about their houses being haunted. So we'd have sleepovers, age 10 or so, and break out the Ouija board and try to make contact. But what really intrigued me was that the family was behind this. Yeah, someone lives here with us. And it wasn't like some Hollywood ghost story where there's blood dripping out of the walls and people screaming and things like that. It was just someone else lives here. And I was intrigued. I didn't feel like they were lying. And I went to school to be a writer. I wanted to be a journalist, and I interviewed people from all walks of life on all kinds of subjects. But every October, you go looking for ghost stories and ghostly features, and it just evolved into a website and then a career. And I can't imagine doing anything else now. And it's spread into other avenues of the unexplained as well. And I love the fact that sometimes historical anecdotes back up some of these legends, that these people have been rocked to the core by something they've experienced, and though I came to it as this objective journalist, eventually I would lose my objectivity when I had my own experience, and I've only had a few in 15 years of doing this. There's only been a handful, but you have this life-altering experience that lets you know, I don't know everything about how the universe works.
Well, it sounds like you came to it honestly, which is really cool. I feel like when we are introduced to something when we're young, and then we move into it as an adult, it comes to us as such a passion and something that we're looking for answers or information or a way to express this thing that we just find fascinating.
Yeah,
and it sounds like that's for you.
Yeah, it's there's so many facets that come into play when you're talking about anything paranormal, and it's human psychology, it's sociology, it's history, it's belief, it's religion, it's spirituality, it's even physics, it's all of these wonderful subjects that just get thrown together into a giant gumbo full of gooey goodness. And I love that. I love that, it touches on so many aspects of the human experience, because that's what this is at the end of the day. It's a human experience. There's no paranormal without a human witness, without someone to retell the story or to convey what they went through or saw or felt or otherwise when it comes to this stuff. And to me, that's cool. It's a people business, and I really like people. Oddly enough.
But I like the way that you frame that it's a human experience, even though some people think it's an imaginary human experience.
Yeah.
But
and guess what? They might be right. In some cases, I'm sure they're right. And that's all part of the story. That's all part of it. I've encountered cases where I've seen people who want to experience a ghost so badly because to validate whatever it is they think or believe that they do imagine things. I've been in buildings where someone walks by a curtain and the curtain flutters, and someone else walks in at that instant and says, "Look, the curtain's fluttering. No one did that." And you say, "No, I just walked by it. That was me." No, that couldn't have been you. I just walked in. And you say, but it was me, really. Yeah, it wasn't a ghost. And so, yeah, sometimes people, do fool themselves, and it all becomes part of this great big discussion and debate, which is awesome.
And it can be very intellectually stimulating. I remember at one conference we had this whole conversation about, is it about wormholes? Is it about multiple dimensions? Is it about portals through time and space? What is this phenomena actually involved with? Because we don't really know, and thankfully there are people that are really starting to take it seriously, that we might get at least some kind of answer or get a little closer to the source.
Yeah, that may be. What I found, I gave up trying to preach about this stuff years ago because I realized, with all the world religions, with all their billions of dollars of resources and people behind them, and none of them have been able to get 100% market share, what chance do I have? Just some guy from New England. But I have found answers, but they're my answers. And they mean something to me, and I can't guarantee they would mean something to someone else. It's become very much a soul search kind of endeavor, doing this over the years, and that's the other great thing about it. I have come up with a few answers along the way. For example, when I was in college, I almost became an atheist. I didn't become one. I just kind of devolved down to what I felt was just about an atheist. And the reason I never quite crossed that line is because of ghosts, because so many people I had talked to had this experience that they believed to be valid, even though I hadn't had one yet, not at that point. That I said, well, shoot, if there's a ghost, that means there's an afterlife. And if there's an afterlife, that means there's something else out there. And that's what I've been trying to answer for myself ever since. What is out there? Because God, death is the great equalizer, isn't it? It's one of our two guarantees in life, the other being taxes. We are going to be taxed and we're going to die. It's comforting in a way. It equalizes all of us. And what comes next, I don't know, but I've got some ideas.
So, as a kid, going into those spooky old houses, in retrospect or in hindsight, do you think that some of the weird stuff that might have happened might have been ghost-related?
You know,
did you have weird stuff that happened? That might be a better question.
Yeah, no, not so much as a kid. We used the Ouija board, and it worked. It spelled stuff out, and that was certainly interesting. And we were even skeptical back then. I remember blindfolding my friends, saying, all right, let's see if it still works if you're blindfolded. It did not, which is fine. That not to say it's bunk or not. It's just maybe it needs your senses. There was enough intrigue back then. I believed my friends. I just didn't think they were lying about this. The story was consistent. It wasn't over the top. The parents backed it up, said, please don't tell your parents. They'll think we're nuts. We take for granted how much we're allowed to talk about this subject today. 25 years ago, you really weren't. It was still taboo. It wasn't on every television network, with 5 different shows each. There weren't 780,000, paranormal radio shows and books and millions of websites. It was another time, and still in the closet. So it's been very interesting to see how since then, it has come out of the closet. We are allowed to talk about this, unlike before, in a much more open way, which I think is really neat.
I grew up in a haunted house. I mean, it was a residual haunting. There was the dead guy. That's what I call him, the dead guy that lived in the basement. And everyone in my family knew about the dead guy, but no one ever talked to the other person about the dead guy. And so if you asked them, well, where was the dead guy? They would all tell you the exact same spot. Everybody knew where he was. Everybody knew he was there. But it wasn't until when I wrote my book, Dark Angels, which is about ghosts, and I share the story about the dead guy, my sister goes, oh, I knew all about him. And I'm like, how come you never? It was kind of news to me that everybody knew about the dead guy.
Yeah, isn't that good? And today I think there's less of that going on because families are communicating. Because all these shows, it's a great byproduct of the popularity of the subject. As you can say, oh, wasn't that weird on that on Ghost Adventures last night when they did this? But something like that actually happened to me in this very house, and then family members can use that as an opening to get a discussion going, and around office water coolers and all that stuff, and it's great. Like I said, it's a human experience. We experience so many different things. I mean, forget about just the paranormal. Think of the range of emotions we go through as people. Love and sadness and joy and pain and suffering and all of that stuff that adds to this human experience that affects every one of us. There's an interconnectedness between all people. I believe it. We leave marks everywhere we go. I mean, you don't believe me? Walk into your bank and be really nasty to the teller, and see how that person's day is ruined and how he or she ruins other people's days, just because you were mean. Or the inverse, be really kind and see how you brighten someone up. And, that butterfly effect that goes out. And we leave those marks. And in some cases, I believe those marks are our ghosts. A battle in Gettysburg that left tens of thousands dead, wounded, or missing in the span of 3 days in 1863 leaves a mark. And I consider myself as psychic as a fence post, but when I'm standing on those battlefields, you feel something. And I don't think that's a psychic sense. I think that's a human sense. I know what took place here, and I feel that. I feel that humanity. Go ahead, tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm really psychic.
You're really psychic, clairsentient. I mean, well, we're not even going to get into that discussion, but
no,
because I think people go into locations and not even know that they are someplace significant and will feel the energy. And I'm going to give a personal example.
Absolutely, yeah.
When I live in the Dallas area, when I first moved here, of course, the first thing I had to do was go find the grassy knoll,
right?
Obviously. And so I'm walking around downtown Dallas, and I just
Did you find the shooter, by the way?
No, I didn't find the shooter, but I just kind of put my little spidey senses on. And I'm walking around, and I get on this one street, and all I feel is all of this emotional energy, and I'm just like, my God, is this the grassy knoll? And I'm looking around, I don't see any. And I look up, and there was this thing, this big white thing, cube-looking thing, which I couldn't quite figure out what it was. So I walk around this cube thing, and it turned out to be the JFK Memorial.
Oh.
And but I didn't even know there was a JFK Memorial. And I think when people go into areas where there's a lot of emotional energy, you can't help but feel it.
Oh, sure. No, absolutely. And the example I give is, with living people, if you've ever walked into a room where a couple, especially like a couple that's romantically involved, just had a really raging argument, and you walked into the room, and even though the argument may have happened minutes ago before you got there, you can just feel like, whoa, did I walk into a freezer? The tension in here is intense. And I think, we've experienced, anyone who's been a kid who had parents, who had fights like that where you'd walk in and go, whoa, what did I just step into? That's
it's that bad mojo vibe.
Human. Yeah, it's just being human.
But see, the example I like to give, because people always look at the negative, and the anger and the hostility, which is a very intense emotion. However, and this is if you're thinking about having your house, like investigated for ghosts or anything, sexual energy does leave an imprint.
Remind me to take down the handcuffs and whip some chains.
You don't even need to do that. There's been more houses I've walked in and gone, and just start chuckling to myself.
Right.
Like, ooh, let's get some spray in here.
Nice.
Yeah, I thought you would appreciate that one, Jeff.
Yes, because I'm warped. And I like to hear about the weird, kinky stuff people do in the houses you investigate. That would be a great radio show. Oh, my gosh. You should get on that.
Okay.
It's all yours. Take it. Run with it.
Okay. Do you consider yourself a paranormal investigator? I'm going to clarify that. A ghost hunter? Or do you see yourself more as an author, or is it a combination of the two kind of thing?
It's tough to label because, ghost hunter is such a funny term. I mean, I do investigate. I go and check things out. I don't deal with a lot of family cases because they're often more complex than I can handle, and I own that. More complex than most people can handle. Not everyone owns that, but I do investigate. I enjoy going out to the locations, but I mainly want to see what I experience with my senses. I'm fascinated by the story. I'm always a writer at heart, and to be a writer, you need to experience things. There's no way to write in a vacuum. It's very hard, anyway. You need to get out there and experience things. And so to experience things, you got to roll your sleeves up and experience all sides of it, and that includes the investigation. That means sitting in front of the EMF meters and trying all the things that you see other people do who because they sometimes get results. So, yeah, I hate labels. Sure, I'm whatever anyone wants to call me, researcher, paranormal researcher, I guess is probably closest to the mark.
Okay. I mean, I was just kind of curious because, you are so active in writing, but does your writing branch out from your interest in going and doing investigations, or is it more from an intellectual place?
Yeah, it depends on the day. You know what? Let's say I'm a stand-up philosopher, to quote a wonderful movie by Mel Brooks.
Not comedian, just stand-up philosopher.
Stand-up philosopher.
Okay.
That's totally true. That's closer to the mark. Let's go with that. Stand-up philosopher. I'm putting that on my W-2.
So in your book, because what we're kind of talking about is the world's most haunted places, you detail your experiences that people have had from around the world in different locations, which we're going to talk about some of those, and you can tell us the spooky stories. But have you ever seen a ghost or had any kind of... Well, you said you have, so
yes. What
are they? What kind of paranormal experiences, like weird, spooky things have happened to you?
I fell off the objective fence back in 2003, and I had already been writing about ghosts for years at this point. I had my website up and everything, back in the 90s, and so I was already actively writing about this stuff. And I was in Paris, France, 30 meters below the city in the Catacombs. And this is where in the mid-1700s to 1800s, they moved about 6 million human remains below ground because they had to close the cemeteries. They were spilling over. And they also had to close all these underground tunnels because the city was getting so heavily, dense and heavy with buildings, it was collapsing. They had tunneled out all this great limestone and had this network of tunnels, 300 kilometers in all. And so I'm down there, and I get to the point where there's a doorway that says, "Stop, this is the Empire of the Dead." It says that in French. And I walk through, and there's this rows and rows of human skeletons lined up. I mean, if I put my fingertips out in both directions, I'd be touching skulls with both fingers. And as I'm walking through this hallway, this long straightaway with just skulls everywhere, I see a shadow the size of a man move from the right side to the left and go back again. And at that moment, time froze for me. Everything slowed down, and my brain is such that I start going through this database saying, okay, what could this be? Did someone get down here with me? No, impossible. Like I said, if my arms were stretched out, you would have literally run into me. Impossible for you to have gone from behind or from in front. Is there a side tunnel where I just didn't see someone and then I looked and verified, nope, this is just a long straightaway? Could it be the lightings on the floor and a little mouse casts a great big shadow? Nope, the lightings at my shoulder. Just check. And you run out of check marks and you say, okay, if that was not a ghost, then I can't possibly explain what it is I just experienced. Now, that place is full of history, full of legend. I know I'm not the only person to have those experiences down there, and that was indeed the reason I went down there, was to, see this for myself. But I wasn't prepared because I had never had the experience before. And it sinks in. It sinks in over the course of the afternoon, the next days, the coming weeks, months, even years later. I can close my eyes. That event was seared into my permanent memory. But skeptical people, and fair enough, could say, yeah, but you were all alone. Maybe you were overtired, jet-lagged, drunk, whatever. I can tell you I wasn't drunk or on drugs. But fair enough. I was there alone. I had nothing to validate that experience. Years later, I would have one of my other experiences when there were 3 other people standing there, and all of us experienced the same thing at the same time. And I just don't accept the concept of a mass hallucination. And if there is such a thing, that's as paranormal as the UFOs landing at the White House anyway. So, really, we should study that anyway. But so that further experience validates the first. Say, okay, there was no one else where I could poke them in the arm and say, do you see that down there? But later on, when it did happen, where other people were around, wow. And then it sinks in. I've had that experience. I've stood on the mountain and I've seen something I can't explain in any other way.
So did it scare you?
No, it didn't. That's the funny thing. Like even the first time, I was just intrigued. It was. I'm sure that there was some sense of fear there because it's unknown. But for the most part, I was very curious. I didn't feel threatened. I didn't feel like I was in danger. But very intrigued. I think I was more scared that afternoon back in my hotel room when I just sat down and really thought about it and went, whoa, it kind of sunk in, now that the experience is over. And then since then, I go looking for this stuff. So I'm generally not afraid when it happens. I've never had an experience where I felt like I was in some kind of physical danger or even spiritual danger for that matter. So I find it really interesting.
I don't find ghosts spooky. I find the location spooky, but I don't find the ghost spooky, which seems like such a contradiction.
Yeah, we're human. A ghost story, and by calling it a story, I'm not saying it's false or otherwise. I'm just saying at some point a legend becomes a story, and that's part of this whole thing. Those ghosts must be set on a stage, and the stage is the history of the location. And sometimes it's the setting. For example, there's a good reason you don't see any of these ghost shows filming at a McDonald's that was built 8 months ago on ground that may have been a battlefield, because it's not the right context for where we expect our ghosts to dwell. Even though that McDonald's could be the most haunted place on earth, right? Ghosts everywhere, serving you burgers. But it's out of context. It's not what we expect. We expect old, creepy, abandoned buildings, or at least old historic places or old battlefields. And so all of that plays a role. And when you're in a creepy setting, like the Catacombs, and I also recognize this, being an animal that is a human, when you are afraid, your senses are sharpened. It's a normal fight or flight response. your senses get real sharp, and not only that, whatever is about to happen gets burned into your permanent memory, and that's survival. I mean, that goes back millennia, because if you get out of the situation, you can pass that information on to your kin and, you know, make them smarter, wiser, and all that other stuff. Being a little bit afraid and having your senses sharpened, I recognize makes you more alert to subtle things in the environment, sounds, sights, feelings, all of that stuff. Maybe it's even tapping into that psychic realm, because we need all the information we can get right now when we're in a situation like that. So it could be those spooky settings, graveyards, abandoned buildings or whatever, make people in general more sensitive to this stuff.
Well, I think it's something that they would be more conscious of or aware of. I mean, I've done investigations into fairly, you know, modern homes, you know, 10 years old. Actually, when I lived in California, there was a shopping mall that wasn't that old in a very nice part of town. That couldn't keep business. And there were all kinds of stories that came out of this place, and the energy in it was kind of weird. And they couldn't keep people. They couldn't keep the stores alive, and so the mall, went under, only to find out that it had been built on Indian burial grounds that had been relocated. Oops.
Right. Yeah, the whole, isn't that, you know, that's one of those things, too, the Indian burial ground thing. Like, that's, I mean, it comes up so often, you know. I mean, we had people living in this country for thousands of years before us. I guess we shouldn't be surprised when those kinds of things turn up. But yeah, you wonder, you know. And I'm curious because honestly, I mean, I can embrace the skeptical side of things too. I think we all should, you know. And it's when you run out of answers. I saw a very prominent skeptic speak once. And he was great speaker. And he said, look, 99% of this stuff can be explained away. And I wanted to stand up and scream, I completely agree with you. It's the 1% that interests me, you know? That's the stuff that keeps me up at night. Let's ignore the 99%. Let's focus on that 1%, that stuff that we just can't explain, and you know, and move on. What is it that makes some business not successful, and what is it that makes us drawn into other locations for whatever reason, spiritual reasons? Why are churches placed where they're placed? Why was Stonehenge, you know, placed where it was placed? All these things really intrigue me.
It sounds like you are interested in a lot of different things. Like me.
Yeah. You know, you start down one path, and I mean, at some point too, I was on this great expedition. It was so much fun. I was working on a book called Weird Massachusetts, which was part of the Weird U.S. series. You've probably seen a Weird Texas and Weird, you know, whatever other state you're from, and it was a great project. And so I took a Bigfoot researcher and a guy from MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, and a ghost hunter, and we all went up to a place called October Mountain in western Massachusetts. Gorgeous place, absolutely gorgeous. But all the legends are there. There's an old abandoned Boy Scout camp where there have been UFO sightings. There have been Bigfoot sightings in that vicinity as well, and at the top there's an abandoned cemetery that's said to be haunted. And it was so fun. Everybody's looking at each other. You know, the Bigfoot guy's saying, look, I just think it's a North American ape that we haven't categorized yet. You know, nothing paranormal about it. We're just elusive. And you know, and the ghost guy's looking at him going, really? Don't you think we'd find a dead one by now? And the UFO guy's saying to the ghost guy, you know, really, ghosts? You really think we hang around after death? And the Bigfoot guy's saying, really? You think aliens are going to cross billions of miles just to come here to see us? Come on, really? You know, and we realize we're all crazy, I think, is the point. And then there was a lot more commonality that came out of it at the end of the day. And you start to say, well, what is it? What is it that makes us think there are Bigfoot out there and UFOs and aliens and all these things? And it's because of stories. It's because people who we trust, or at least believe enough, are telling us something really compelling. And then some of us actually have these experiences for ourselves, and it validates so much of what's out there, and keeps us going and wanting to learn more and try to figure this stuff out.
I mean, working as a psychic investigator, you know, when I go and do an investigation, I don't ever want to know anything other than here's the address. And the part that I love is I'll go through and then make my observations and reports back to the property owner and just watch their head go, Which I find very validating, and I think they find very validating that this complete stranger could walk onto their property and not know anything and then reflect back to them exactly what they've been experiencing.
Yeah. No, that's always interesting when that happens, and how do you explain
that? It's cool. Come on.
Yeah,
it's cool.
Totally cool.
Where do I want to go? I want to move into. We need to move on. I want to move into some of the stories, Before I do, I think I want to ask this first. Before I do, have you noticed in the different locations that you've been to, because you've been to a lot of places, and interviewed a lot of people, any kind of patterns to the places that are haunted versus ones that aren't haunted, or anything related to like the level or quality of a haunting?
Yeah, it's tough to compare one to another because people, a common question is, why are there ghosts? Well, my answer to that is there are as many reasons as there are ghosts. So, it's tough to rank one above another. Other than, I do notice that there are certain locations that have a lot more reports than others. Some places it seems like once a week or more somebody's having an experience and talking about it. At a place like Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Louisville, Kentucky, which was a place where thousands died of tuberculosis. It's a place where people went when they had tuberculosis consumption, and tried to get as much comfort as they could in their final days. And it's a sad place, but also one that just the ghostly reports continue to pour out of there. And that's one of the other places where I've had an experience. In other locations, I do find there needs to be some history there for it to interest me in the first place. I'm not saying that new constructions can't be haunted. We talked about that earlier, but from my perspective, that's maybe when the writer takes over. I'm looking for the story that may validate the current experiences. And if a building's been around for centuries or more, and if history's made a mark there, I think those walls still talk. I think that we pick up on that, and maybe it's haunted because it ought to be. Maybe the reason Gettysburg is haunted is because it should be. President Lincoln observed that back when he gave the Gettysburg Address, and he said, "We cannot hollow this ground. The men who died here did that far beyond our ability." Paraphrasing there a little bit, but it's true. They made it haunted. We should always remember that it's haunted, because if we start putting up strip malls there, then we'll forget a pretty important chapter in our country's history and just what we're capable of doing to each other. And that's really important. That's just one of the many roles I think that ghosts can play. And so when you're comparing locations, sure, the locations that had a lot of death, like Waverly Hills, like Gettysburg, have a higher number of ghostly accounts of people having experiences than other locations where there's just been one murder. But you need people. Like I said, these ghosts don't exist in a vacuum. You need living people to be there to witness them, to keep talking about them, for it to go on, for the legend to grow.
A few years ago, a friend of mine was trying to talk me into going to Germany, and my comment was, but if I went there, I'm sorry, I would be compelled to go to the concentration camps, or at least one. But I thought that the energy would be really overwhelming.
Sure.
And and just, it was kind of like, I feel like I would need to do it, but then would I be able to handle it emotionally?
Sure.
But all right, this is kind of like sick and distorted, but it just came up. You notice no one's ever gone in and done investigations, or not that I'm aware of any of the concentration camps?
Yeah, they have.
They have?
I want to say, and please don't quote me and forgive me, my friends at Ghost Hunters International, I believe they did one of them in Poland for the shows. Part of the reason, and it's the same reason that people don't go investigate, say, the site of the Twin Towers in New York, the wound is still too raw. It's still too touchy for people to kind of go there and think that, whoa, my loved one might be a ghost. as opposed to, and that's when we get into problems where people want to define a ghost. And, to some people, a ghost, suggesting someone is a ghost is to suggest they're earthbound, they can't move on, they can't, I'm not saying this is right or wrong, I'm just saying that's what some people assume, and that's disrespectful to think that a fallen soldier or, God forbid, a close family member may be in that situation. And that, again, that's dealing with their definition of it, not necessarily mine. And so I think some places are just too touchy, and we can't go there. We can't suggest, even though I think a lot of us know it silently, that sure, it must be haunted. It must be not only haunted, but haunting. We don't go there because it's a respect thing.
Mm-hmm. But I think it would be kind of interesting. Way.
I mean, absolutely. And I mean, look at all the people that do visit these places, the concentration camps, and the people who go and had family members who perished there. And you see, the emotional outpouring of the living people today who just go there and just break down thinking about what their grandparents or whatever relative, must have gone through in a location like that. And that emotion, I don't know, I think that emotion hangs around. It sets a tone for sure.
Mm-hmm. No, I'll agree. So let's move on to story time. So everybody get your hot cocoa. It's the daytime. This is the only bad thing about doing ghosty things in the middle of the afternoon. It's like it's not dark. All right, close the blinds, turn off the light, get it a little spooky. So I was so intrigued by some of the locations, and so I just kind of picked a few of them. But the first one I want to talk about, the White House. The White House is haunted. I can't even imagine living there. You have to live here for 4 years, and it's haunted?
That's why I won't run for president. I'll be honest with you. That and a million other reasons. But, the White House has intrigued me for years because the witnesses are so credible. I actually wrote a children's book called Who's Haunting the White House. It was after I started working on it for World's Most Haunted Places. And the children's book opened doors. I got to go down there. I got to interview the staff and get the tour and talk to some of the people who have worked there. In some cases, there was a butler who was a third-generation butler. His dad was a butler at the White House. His dad's dad was a butler at the White House. And when you think about the stories, that family alone, no president comes close to spending as much time as that gentleman and his family have spent in the White House. A president gets 8 years tops. And this guy's been there for decades and weekends and nights, and these folks are really reliable witnesses. That's what I love about it. When I'm not talking about the presidents, they can be crazy and do drugs. We don't drug test presidents. We don't check their criminal backgrounds. We just vote them in or not. So those guys are not necessarily reliable witnesses, though many presidents have experienced the ghost. But the people who work there are drug-tested, psychologically screened, criminal background checks, 8 ways to Sunday. And there's about 100 employees who work for the White House. It doesn't matter which political party's in power. They're the butlers, the cleaning crew, the folks who take care of that house. And they're wonderful patriots. They're amazing people who serve their country by serving what they call the presidency as opposed to an individual. And these guys have had experiences. There's talks about a British redcoat right near the North Portico. And that's interesting because there's a little spot right near the North Portico where they never painted it since 1814 because the White House was burned to the ground by the British when they sacked Washington, D.C. during the War of 1812. And they left a section unpainted so you could still see the scorch marks. It's this reminder. Look what happens when you let your guard down. And so people report seeing a British redcoat. Now, that's the White House. There are pressure sensors in the lawn. There's stuff so advanced security-wise that you won't know about it for probably 20 years. No one walks on those grounds. No one does anything without it being checked and double-checked by a lot of people. And when you're in the house, when you're upstairs in the presidential living quarters, it's even more secure. No one gets up there if they're not supposed to. And there was a foreman that had an amazing story. He was walking in early one morning to turn on the lights, and right outside the Lincoln bedroom, he turns on the lights, and sitting there is Abe Lincoln, sitting cross-legged, described what he was wearing, his hands folded, and he looked right at him and then disappeared. And you say, okay, this is the White House. Now, the Lincoln bedroom was never Lincoln's bedroom. That was actually, it would have been the executive office back when Lincoln was president. This was before the East and West wings were added in. And we know what Lincoln looks like. It's not like you see some shadowy figure walking way down the hall who could have been anybody, with, any living person. It's Abe Lincoln. He's on our money. His portrait hangs in the building. We know what he looks like. And to have that experience and say, I didn't believe in ghosts until that moment, until I came downstairs and said, I think I just saw President Lincoln upstairs. And to be told, oh, you're just one of the many witnesses over the years who've had that experience. I love that. I love how reliable of a witness it is, and I love that it's happening in a place where, history left such a mark.
Other people have seen Lincoln?
Yeah, other people
in the house.
Oh my gosh, there's Queen Wilhelmina was staying there in the 1940s. There's a story that Winston Churchill, when he was staying at the White House, answered the door and and it was in his underwear or something. And there's a great quote. I think he said, "Mr. President, you seem to have me at a disadvantage." What was the line he gave? And Churchill was, of course, so quotable. Yeah, there's been many presidents, and I remember seeing an interview with George Bush the Senior, who had said, it was one of his early days in office, and he was about to send some troops into harm's way, and he was struggling with the decision, because this was his first real military action as president. And he said, I started thinking about President Lincoln and what he went through, and there's no president that even comes close to President Lincoln as far as having a difficult presidency. You had a nation at war with itself, civil war, right around your front door. He lost his son. His son Willie died in the White House while he was serving, and of course he paid the ultimate price. He was assassinated. And I remember hearing George Bush saying, I thought about what Lincoln went through, and it gave me some peace to know I can do this. And I almost wondered, do our current presidents keep his spirit around? Does President Lincoln still hang around in case he's needed? He's that benchmark, he's that far extreme. That's as bad as it will ever get as president is Lincoln. You will not have it as bad as him. And I think every president since has taken some strange comfort in that.
That's really cool. Any other ghosties in the White House?
Oh, tons. When the White House was first built, the East Room, they had no money for furniture. They had enough money to build the White House. And the Adamses, John and Abigail, were the first to move in, second president, and George Washington actually never lived there. Even though he approved the plans and laid the cornerstone, he died before it was complete. And so they had no furniture when they moved into the White House. And they weren't going to move their stuff down from Braintree, Massachusetts, because they knew being president is a temporary gig. So the East Room was used to hang laundry because it was just this big empty room. And why go outside and face the elements? And people have reported seeing a woman hanging laundry.
They were in the South.
Yeah, well, say what you want, but people have reported seeing this woman hanging laundry in the East Room and smelling soap and like detergent kind of smells, and we can only attribute that to Abigail Adams, who was indeed hanging laundry there. And there's been others too. I mean, it's the ghost of a little boy who we believe was Willie Todd Lincoln, who did die in the White House, has been experienced over the years, and the stories just go on and on. And considering how modern everything is there, and when you go inside, it takes your breath away. You think every single president stood where I'm standing. It's an amazing place.
That's cool. We're planning on going to Washington, D.C., I think this coming summer, so I think we might have to go do that tour just to go check it out that way.
You should, and I can tell you, if you're going to do that, you need to contact your rep now. It's all arranged through your state representatives, and because they do background checks on everyone that goes through there, and so it's something that it's not as easy. It used to be you just waited in line, before 9/11.
I'm thinking Disneyland,
Yeah, you could just stand out there and eventually you'd get in. But now you do need to do a little planning ahead, which is actually good for everybody because it means you'll have an appointment and you don't have to stand there for hours. You can just show up like 15 minutes early and get right in. But it still can be done, and it's very much worth doing.
Well, that's a great heads up. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Okay, let's see. Next one. This one I thought was kind of weird but interesting, and I'm hoping you're not going to say, oh, yeah, it's in Dallas. Spaghetti Warehouse.
Yeah, it's in Houston, actually. Houston.
All right, that's far enough away.
No, Spaghetti Warehouse. Yeah, it's an interesting building, and what intrigued me was some of the stories that I was hearing coming out of there. I talked to one of the night managers who said, she was the last person to leave and close the place down, and she did her duties as usual, and it happens that the next day she was also the first person to come in and unlock, just the way the shifts worked. And she walked in, and she said on the second floor she found that the chairs, and these are heavy wooden chairs, had been interlocked. Like if you took a chair and then took the next one and twisted it, 20 degrees so it locked between the one below it. She said there was a stack to the ceiling of over a dozen chairs high. Someone had done this. And she said, you'd need a ladder. She said, I know, I set the alarm and everything. I was the last person to leave, and then I come in and find these things. People have found food eaten in the kitchen. Like she said, she walked in and she said, it looked like someone made a sandwich, and they must have taken bites of it, but those bites were all on the floor in a row, as if they're walking and eating at the same time. And you say, all right, that's really interesting, almost like it would have fallen through the ghostly belly, like you took the bite and there it is on the floor. So really intriguing stuff. And then of course you got to look at the history of the place, and it's just a great old building that's left its mark. And Texas is interesting when it comes to some of its haunts, because Texas is the kind of place that they don't let buildings sit around too long. They're torn down, and I mean, I'm generalizing, of course, but in general, they're torn down and made way for new buildings.
Okay, so I'm not hearing you.
Hello?
Oh, there you are.
Breaker 19.
Yeah, we're back.
Hey, we're back.
Woohoo! I have to tell you, when I do ghost shows, the phones go weird. So.
Oh, it's funny. Who knows?
It happens.
I'm
serious. It happens. Or if I'm going to go speak at a conference the next day, a ghost conference, I have weird phone lines.
Yeah, who knows, huh? Isn't that intriguing?
Okay, so you were talking about Spaghetti Warehouse, Texas history, and
so the building goes back to 1912, and it was a produce business before that, and the story goes that that there was I believe there was a suicide in the building, and then just that's what kind of started the whole legend, and now it's Spaghetti Warehouse, which of course is a chain restaurant that's using the building and still experiencing those ghosts from the past.
That's really cool. I know in Texas, I mean, as you move further, I have to think about this, west, you don't have stuff that's as old as you experience on the East Coast, the Northeast, or, the Southeast, because our history doesn't, well, I take that back. There is stuff, but it's not stuff that we necessarily have in our consciousness because it's Spanish or it's French. Like last week we did a show about New Orleans. Oh, super haunted.
Sure.
And like in California, there's a lot of old Spanish stuff, Spanish missions that are very, very old. But when we think of more contemporary, or society as we know it, it's 1860s, which to me isn't that old. I mean, it's kind of old, but not that old.
No, it's certainly a relative thing, and God, those Spanish missions are great. I know we did one of those on Ghost Adventures for the Travel Channel, and it was the stories are amazing, and that's one of the things I love about this job, about getting to research paranormal locations, is that you find how different cultures deal with this concept. Deal with the paranormal. Some are very matter of fact. Some you just don't talk about it. Fine, it's there. I agree with you, but let's not say another word of it. And everything in between. It's so intriguing.
So I'm looking at the clock. We have about 10 minutes. So let me ask you this. What's your favorite haunted location, and what's its story?
I waver all the time. It's almost like asking, who's your favorite child, of yours. And they all mean something to me on different levels, but I keep going back to the big creepy places. I can't help it. There's a place called Mansfield Reformatory in Ohio, and I'll actually be there next month. We're doing an event there, and this is one of those few places where you walk in and you say, oh my gosh, there's something here, and that never happens to me. I've been in, it didn't happen to me in the Catacombs. It doesn't happen to me in graveyards or anything like that, but when I walked into Mansfield Reformatory, this great old prison, huge, 6 stories. To give you an idea, if you've ever seen the movie Shawshank Redemption,
I love that movie.
That's the prison. That's where they filmed it. They filmed
really?
it in Mansfield Reformatory after it had closed. That became the movie set. And incredible place. And I walked through, and this is one of those situations where I was with 4 other people at this time, and we all had an experience that we couldn't explain. We were in the administrative building and on the lower floor, and let me say too, it looks creepy. It's abandoned. It's taken care of well enough, but there's no furniture or anything. It's this big, empty, dusty building, and you're walking around, and you just breathe it in. This is a prison. You can only imagine the kind of stuff that took place there. You know the kind of people they put in there, and it just oozes in all that stonework around the building. And as we're down on the administrative side, where the offices were, we're on the first floor, and there's a kind of a half stairway. The stairway goes up, and then it turns and goes up both sides on the other side, so there's like a landing halfway. And 5 of us see someone walking across this landing. We're talking. I could go back and measure it, 25 feet, 30 feet from where we were, not very far. And do you see that? Yeah. Everybody's watching these legs go back and forth. And I thought, okay, maybe someone's casting a shadow from the upper landing, so I race all the way up there. No one's up there. And not only that, the only way I could reproduce the leg effect and the shadow effect was to literally walk on the landing. Walking up above cast no shadow. We tested it, and that's just the kind of person I am. And then when you test something and you run out of explanations, you say, okay, we all saw that. We all experienced something we can't explain any other way. And the place is incredible. You walk into these the cell blocks, 6 stories of cages, where humanity was just locked away. And you learn that it took them a while to put up the chain link fence on all the cages, because on the 6th floor, on the 6th story, if someone was a snitch or if someone wasn't liked, they were just tossed over, thrown away. And you dig into the prison history, and you talk to old wardens, and you learn, I spoke to a warden who said he remembers one guy that was in for armed robbery for 5 years, and he had something like 5 weeks to go on his sentence, and he walked out into the prison yard and just killed another man, straight, just cold-blooded, killed him right in the prison yard. And the warden said to him, you were going to be out of here in 5 weeks. All you have to do is keep your head down for 5 weeks. You've already been in here for years. Why would you do that? And his answer was, it needed to be done. And he said, this is the thing that people don't understand who haven't been in prison. The value of everything, especially life, inside is very different than for people who are outside. And that starts to sink in, and you start thinking about that. Your life isn't worth much when you're locked away in a cage like that. Out here, we've got cable and cars, and we've got pizza and beer in the fridge. They don't have that. And their value of what their lives are worth, especially among each other, just ain't much. And the fear, the rage, the violence, all of that stuff is just soaked into those walls, and you feel that when you walk through just the towers of cages and the floor where, old convicts will tell you, I watched a guy bleed out right here after, he was knifed getting out of the shower, and you just say, oh my, it leaves a mark. It leaves a mark not just on the building, but on you when you go through it.
Wow. And it's not like it's just 1 or 2 people. Those institutions were used for a really long time. And, just listening to what you're saying, it's not like Gettysburg where there was a situation that happened in the course of a day or a couple of days.
Yeah.
And we're talking about years of just accumulating that kind of energy.
Yeah, it's an amazing place. It's haunting. And those kind of places just call to me. I want that experience. I once you've had it a couple of times, you want to have it again. And believe me, I understand people who are leery that the people who have experiences everywhere, unless they're psychic or whatever. You wonder, how can that be? How can it be that I look in all these places and I don't have it? But now I've had a few, and I've been back to Eastern State I think twice now. This will be my 4th time, I think, next month. And it was only that first time that something happened. And it's still exciting. It's still exciting for me to go back to where it did happen and to stand in the exact spot again and say, all right, I was right here when I saw that thing. And it's just, there's nothing I'd rather do on a Saturday night. What can I say?
So I have to tell you, Jeff, I wrote down 4 stories, little markers on my paper, because I always have notes and stuff. And so the 4 stories I put: the White House, Spaghetti Warehouse, the Catacombs, which you talked about,
right,
and the Mansfield Reformatory. Those are the 4 stories that
nice.
I wrote on my paper. And you covered them all. So, see, you were having like a total psychic moment because you were looking over my shoulder, reading my paper, and you knew exactly which ones I wanted to hear about.
Oh, well, my pleasure. Yeah, no, there's so...
I'm just validating it for you, babe.
There's so many places out there. They're not just, they're not just far away. There's places in your town, and it's those haunts, those local haunts that make a place unique. I was in Juneau, Alaska, the state capital, and I got to go to the Alaskan Hotel because I heard it was haunted. And I went in and I said, I'm really interested in this stuff. I want to know more. And the guy behind the counter looks at me and sizes me up and says, Joe, come here a minute. Tell this guy what you saw coming down the stairs. And in an instant, I ceased being a cheesy tourist. I became someone who was interested in something that was uniquely Juneau's, something that was theirs, that belonged to that building and can't be found anywhere on Earth except in that building, that specific ghost in that specific haunt. It's an amazing way to connect with people in your travels, and I can't imagine doing anything else.
Yeah, but that is very, very, very cool. So as we wrap up, what are you up to next? Do you have another book? What's up with you? What's on the horizon? I mean, you talked about, I'm just going to talk here for a second. You talked about you're doing an event at the Mansfield Reformatory.
Yep. Coming
up. So what's up with you?
I've got, I'm hard at work at Season 6 of Ghost Adventures. We're doing, I think 24 more episodes between now and next spring, so we're hard at work doing that. I'm working on a new book on time travel, actually, which is something that really intrigues me. And I've got a lot of events coming up. I'll be in Gettysburg next month, the week before Mansfield, actually, at the Phenomenology event, and doing lots of events at colleges and universities and paranormal conferences all over the place. So just getting out there and living the dream. So thank you for everyone who's been supporting me. I appreciate it.
Well, that's because you're a fun guy. Okay, so now I have to ask a really tacky question. Are you doing the time travel book with Marie Jones and Larry?
No, I'm not. No, I know they're working on one too. Mine's different. I talked to Marie just like a week ago. So no, it's something different.
Cool. I just want to keep that separate.
Sure.
Because we're like a little family.
Yeah, totally. Hey,
so when's that book expected to come out?
I haven't sold it yet, so I don't know. But I can tell you that it's great. I think that the interest in that topic is starting to heat up again, which is interesting. Probably because of the stuff CERN is doing over at the Large Hadron Collider and things like that. So who knows? Maybe we'll come back and prove this time travel stuff's possible.
That would be very cool. I mean, I think that it's just a matter of time for us to figure it out. I mean, at least going forward in time seems like it should work. Going back, I don't know. I when you start thinking about timeline issues, you start to get into ethical considerations, and are you going to start messing up the timeline? But then you get into all the conspiracy stuff. It's like, okay, so who's already gone back and messed up the timeline?
Right.
Who's sneaking through, kind of thing.
I keep waiting for me to walk through my office door and say, listen, keep going on this book. It's going to be awesome. That'd be great.
Well, do you know who James Van Praagh is?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Okay, so I had him on the show in December. And so I normally don't do this, but I was like, James, at the very end, James, tell me something. And so he was talking about some stuff, and then, the music's coming up, and he goes, well, your grandmother's telling me you like to write, and she goes, finish the book. And I'm thinking, my little metaphysical mind going, ooh, what does she know that I don't know?
Nice.
Well, I was just kind of thinking about you telling yourself that you should finish the book because it's going to be awesome.
Well, I'm always working on a book. I mean, I think I'm up to 13 or 14 by now, and it's one of those. It doesn't make any sense. Any aspiring writers out there, get into another line of work, but it's a compulsion. You do it because you have to do it. You're compelled to tell a story, not because it makes much money or anything like that. It's just it's something you just have to do. I call it like exercising the demons. you've got this story in you, and you've got to get it out. And right now, that story is time travel.
Time travel. No, I hear you. It's like, okay, it's time to write a book. So, Jeff, thank you so much for coming on the show. You're always so fun.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It was great to talk to you again.
And, when your new book comes out or whatever, if you want to come and talk about one of your other books, we'll just, get it hooked up.
Sounds good.
Okay, excellent. That's Jeff Ballinger. His webpage is jeffbellinger.com. The book we've been talking about is The World's Most Haunted Places, and we'll be back with Susan Reeve after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.